I'll never forget getting those mold results from the house. And I was so horrified. I had no idea that mold existed in homes.
It's been an exciting pleasure getting to know you over the past few years. Really, what, year and a half or so. But you've become one of my favorite people just because you're an amazing human being. And
Oh,
don't tell anyone, but I'm really excited to get to interview you today because it's a whole different dynamic here. And the first question really that I have is really related to air quality. And so thank you for spending some time today to really help us create awareness around how important it is that air quality really is. So
yeah.
we'll just dive right in. How did you
Let's
first
do it.
discover? Yeah. How did you first discover how important it is to have a safe and healthy environment?
Well, as you know, it was a very long process. It was a lot of detective work. It was almost like, peeling one layer of an onion back and then another and then another. So essentially, I got COVID right at the beginning of the pandemic. So pre-vaccine, kind of really in the scary days when we didn't know,
Yeah.
um, and then I had long COVID. So I just kind of never really fully bounced back. I never fully recovered. So I was trying to get to the bottom of why I was carrying around all this extra inflammation and, kind of working with my regular doctor and being told, it's just long COVID and there's not much we can do about it. We don't know that much about it. Um, and then I just really started to, there was like a niggling voice inside me that really was kind of saying, there's something else going on here. There's something else. And so that really began the process of me trying to, become my own quarterback in a sense and really taking these matters into my own hands, which really became about finding the right people to help me and diagnose me and ask questions. And so I worked with our great friend, Dr. Will Cole, who has been an absolute game changer for me in my life. And, I explained I have long COVID, I have terrible brain fog and fatigue and all these list of symptoms. And I said, I'm sure I have some old legacy gut health stuff. And so I'm really ready to kind of like dive into a program here. And so I started his program and my inflammation just wouldn't drop. And a couple months into me eating like incredibly, being paleo. First, I did a GAPS diet to really reduce inflammation and then being paleo. And he retested me and he said, I think you have mold toxicity. He said, there's no reason that these numbers should still be so high. So that's when I met you.
Yeah, that is
Um,
true.
and
And
I'll never forget getting those mold results from the house. And I was so horrified. I had no idea that mold existed in homes to that degree. I had never thought about it. No one had ever educated me on it. And that began a long process, which we're still going through today of remediation.
yeah, it is. It is a very, very long process, but it's really interesting because I think it took so long for you to get all this information, for you to connect the dots to then do something about it, right? And so
Yeah.
what was that like? I mean, before you met Dr. Will Cole, did you meet with other doctors to try to figure out what was going on?
I did. And I was told, you're in your mid 40s now. This is just what happens. You lose mental clarity and hormones change. You lose vibrancy and energy. Um, One doctor wanted to put me on an antidepressant.
Wow.
Um, One doctor said, you just got to get used to this, just having much lower energy. And, the funny thing is when I started to clean out my body, my energy came back and I felt like I was 28 years old again, or, so it was disheartening to me that, and there, I don't mean this like against allopathic doctors, because there's a great place for that approach to medicine. Absolutely. But there seems to be, especially in my feeling, like in talking to my friends, especially around women, a little bit of a dismissal around symptoms, and you're okay, it's natural, this is just a normal part of being in your 40s and having kids and working. And I knew there was something wrong, and nobody listened to me. Nobody would do. And, I'm in the wellness world. So I would ask, are there tests that we should be thinking about? Like, and so it took a long time for me to get the right intel.
No, I think it's one of the biggest problems with facing this issue is the fact that a lot of doctors are not really educated on the possibility of effects of environmental toxins. And so we
Yeah.
end up missing that fact, right? And we go down this road trying all these other things. I mean, I can't imagine the amount of things that you've exhausted and tried that just didn't work, right? Until you finally found what the root cause was. But, that process happens for so many people. I know that, as I'm listening to you talk, I have a lot of different clients and I hear the same story over and over again. And what our medical community tends to do is normalize these things. Like you
Yes,
you should
exactly.
just you should just accept the fact that you're getting older. And when you get older, apparently this is an apparency that you're supposed to just feel worse, right? As you get older,
Terrible.
you're supposed to just feel
Right.
terrible. And we just accept that and move on. And it's not the case, right? There are answers that we're looking for. Was anyone ever, now that you figured out, okay, the environment was the issue, right? Before you met me and we actually started to resolve this, was anyone ever in disbelief that the environment was contributing to your health?
Well, the disbelief, I think, came after I met you, so first I got, the results that I had a bunch of toxic mold in my body, in my bloodstream, I guess colonized in the gut and sinus, wherever it colonizes, and my levels were incredibly high. And this is really concerning, right? Because mold over a long period of time can be a carcinogen. It can impact your health in a myriad terrible ways. And so I was really concerned because especially a couple of the markers were incredibly high. And I knew by this point that there must be I'm being exposed to mold somewhere. And my kids are living in this house. We all live together. So it was even more urgent for me. And when I got the house tested, I remember there was a real dismissal. Oh, this test isn't right. We did a test. We took air from the middle of the room. The house is fine. This is way overboard. Like we don't see any signs of mold in this house. The guys that I had in there assessing it, we think this is like malarkey, basically. And I said, well, I honestly feel so terrible. I'm willing to try anything. And, I trust these guys. I trust Will Cole. I trust his referrals. Let's see. And I'll never forget you texting me that photograph when they pulled up my bathtub and there was like a carpet of black mold under my tub that was obviously not visible until you pulled up the tub. And I remember asking you, oh, did they apologize? Did they finally believe you now?
Well, they never apologized, but I will say the demeanor definitely changed because once that became visibly apparent, they were just like they were calling me. We found mold, and it's like, well, no crap. We already found mold. We have lab results. It's already there. So this is no surprise to me, but I'm glad you're now on the train. And I think that that's been one of the biggest problems with like accessibility, right? Because accessibility means two different things. You have, can people afford it, right? That's always one part of accessibility. But then what if everyone could afford it, but you still don't know how to properly remove it, right? And that's been the other challenge of accessibility because people are spending good money after bad solutions too. And we've seen that so many times and people do
And
all
that
these
happened at my
transformations.
house, as you know, on Long Island, where I
Yeah.
had a mold issue. Apparently it had been completely remediated. And then you went in there and you were like, this is a disaster.
Yeah. Unfortunately so in that case. And
And
that's
that's very
living proof.
common, right?
It's living proof how common it actually is because, for example, you probably had a certified professional in there, right? They did
Yeah,
their
yeah.
thing. They probably did an air sample in the center of the room, everything cleared. You're thinking peace of mind. I got this. This is all resolved. I feel good about this. But then you start to get sick, right? And then you start to experience the effects of it. And that's when you realize, well, there's other scientific technologies out there to really check that people haven't been using in this industry. And that's why people have kind of gotten into this position, which is really, really sad.
Yeah. I mean, I used to be at that house where we spend our summers. And by the end of the summer, I mean, one summer I had walking pneumonia by the end of the summer. One summer I had severe bronchitis. Another summer, just a couple of years ago, I had a lung infection by the end of the summer. And I thought, gosh, is there something, me, I was thinking like, is there like, am I allergic to something like some kind of weed in the air or some kind of pollen? Like, why is this happening? And then, of course, it turned out that there was toxic mold in the house. The air was in terrible shape.
Yeah, it's well, good news is that we're actually fixing it, ongoing. It's a
I
lot
know.
to swallow, so we're doing it in stages, but it's a phenomenal process to kind of go through when you really fix the problem, right? And now
Yes.
we're going to get you back into that home and be able to enjoy it without any issues and worries. And I think that's really a blessing because it's so, so, so important. Speaking of, since we're getting on symptoms here, right? What are some of the symptoms that you experience when you're in an unhealthy environment?
For me, and it's probably different for everybody, but for me, um, I, and now because of my sensitivity around this stuff, I react pretty quickly, but um, I'll have sneezing and runny nose. Like if I was just in the house, before Thanksgiving, before the remediation started. So running nose, sneezing, um, I get shortness of breath. I get crazy brain fog if I'm exposed for a long time. And when I had been chronically exposed to mold and had those really high levels, I was in bad shape. I mean, I remember, I'll never forget, it was springtime before I found all of this out. And I was driving to brunch and I thought, I'm not going to make it. Like, I need to pull over to the side of the road. I can't see straight. I was like feeling confusion and fatigue that I had never felt in my life. I wouldn't even characterize it as fatigue. It was like, I need to lay down and die. Like, I don't have the energy to keep going. It was one of the scariest moments of my life.
Yeah, that's really crazy to go through. I couldn't imagine being there.
Yeah.
That's scary.
But the upside was, that we can recover from this stuff and you can get mold out of your environment. You can get out of your body. I mean, it's a long process. I'm now 2 years into this almost.
Yeah.
Um, and it's, it's definitely ongoing and it's been a very interesting journey, but I'm just so relieved that, there's something that you can do about it.
There is something you can do about it, and that's the key. And it's reminding people how important this is. I think one of the biggest challenges is, and you've seen this firsthand, it's like all these little things go wrong with your home, right? And usually by the time I'm involved with something, it's like I gotta reconstruct your entire house top to bottom to fix things. But what if this was more top of mind, right? Like
Oh,
what if we did preventative measures, to really stay on top of this so it doesn't get that bad? And I think that's how we have to start to frame things because I mean, this is a big undertaking and it's usually because so many years go by and we don't realize how important this is and then we're trying to pick up the pieces when we're not feeling our best. And I think that's really part of the issue.
yeah. And this is why I was asking you, gosh, well, if I ever do construction again anywhere, what are the things that can be done in that process? And is it okay that we're building houses out of wood? And like, how can we guard against mold colonizing our homes? And and what can we do about it? Because, if it gets to the point where mine got, I mean, it is so unfortunately expensive to rectify the problem, but it's where you live, and it's your health. So you kind of, but if there were preventative measures, like what are the things that can be done to ensure that, I don't know, like, are you testing houses before there's a problem? Like, what are you doing? How are you identifying? Of course, like, meanwhile, right now, there's flooding everywhere in California. All I can think about is like all of the mold that's going to crop up that nobody's going to know about. And
I have those same thoughts all the time. Hurricane Ian, that was, one of the bigger hurricanes of this past year. That there's actually a father fiance who just passed away due to living in the damaged home because FEMA said, there's a roof over your head, so you could stay there. And I think, it just kind of ties back into the problem of the issue of like, we need to really understand as a society, all of us, how important this is. But this what happened in Hurricane Sandy too. It's really what kickstarted my career when I started seeing this pattern of people getting sick after this massive event. And I think, there are lots of things we can do, right? It's when you're building a home, you can treat and the frame when it's dried in, as they call it, meaning there's no more water getting in, the windows are in, right? The framing's all done, roof's on, and you can treat the home then before you start bringing in insulation and drywall. Of course, you can switch to cement framing instead of wood framing. We do some of that in some parts of the country, but I think it doesn't necessarily matter because cement's semi-porous too, like wood. It doesn't necessarily matter that the material, it's if you're going to use a specific material, right, you also have to pay attention to how to install that specific material with
right.
water mitigation in mind, with how it's going to dry. And so it's about how do you assemble these layers in an ideal state. But, so many people, when they're building new homes, what happens is when they deliver the lumber to build the home, it sits in the soil for weeks at a time with rain and all
Yeah.
that stuff. And if mold and bacteria is abundant in the soil. And so you're easily allowing it to transfer from in the soil on the lumber. They build these homes, and they tell people, well, no, it's that way because, well, it's in the elements. How could we build this house any other way? Well, for starters, elevate the lumber out of the soil, right? It's a very simple practice we can do. And if we did it on every home, we'd be better off for it. And so it's a guide, it's in the guidebook, right? It's a recommendation, it's part of the guidelines. But if you drive across America and watch people build homes, nobody's following this, right? And so
Right.
like I said, what does it take, right? It takes all of us agreeing that this is something worth fighting for to create that change. And I think that's the basis of what we need to do. And I'm gonna ask you about that a little bit in a few minutes here. So because I'd love your take on what you think we should be doing. But to just kind of go back to the validity of this. I want to ask: do you feel noticeably better when you are in a safe and healthy environment?
Oh my gosh. It's really night and day. I mean, when I'm home now in California in a house that used to be full of mold, I feel so good. I, skip out of bed. I have energy. I feel completely different. I mean, it's really, I used to at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon have to lie down and like just felt incredible amounts of fatigue, like adrenal fatigue. And now I feel great. Like I feel, of course, I mean, I'm 50 years old. So, but it's not the same as feeling debilitated by coping with something chronic in your body. It's like that feeling is gone. And I'm sensitive to mold. I have that, I'm missing one of those genes that methylate well. So
Sure.
that's another thing. Some people are more sensitive to it and become more symptomatic more easily around mold. I am definitely one of those people. My kids are those people too. My husband is not. Like, he doesn't have that gene mutation, and so his mold levels are a lot lower. But so I'm constantly on a mission to kind of make sure that the air is clean. I still run air purifiers in my in my bed, next to my bed, which I got when I just keep it there. I make sure the house, stays dry. I've basically follow everything you tell me to do. And I feel much, much better.
Well, you are a good student at that. I'll tell you that. You have your HVACs. We've converted your HVACs to be air purifiers, and you also have standalone air purifiers. So I know for sure you're breathing probably the best clean air possible, which is fantastic and amazing. Uh,
So happy.
and it obviously makes me feel really amazing that you feel really amazing in this new home that we created, because I think it's a testament to the fact that this was part of the problem, and
Yeah.
B, it's always my goal to make sure that people know the importance and then do something about it. And so you listened to everything, you did everything, and these are the results of that. So thank you for being
Yeah.
such a good student on that. Um,
Thank
I,
you.
what was probably the biggest challenge you had to overcome in order to assemble this team to create the right environment? I know you said earlier, you had some failed remediation and other things. What was like the biggest challenge you had to overcome?
Really just understanding the difference between, as you said, like a regular certified mold removal person and what you guys do. A friend of mine had a big flood in her house. Um, her basement flooded, and I was like, who you pick to come and deal with this is so critical. And I wish there was a way of, being able to understand the way that you look at mold and the way that kind of it's been conventionally done, because that's the biggest challenge. You think that you're dealing with the problem, and then it turns out it really hasn't been addressed whatsoever. And you've spent good money to do it, and it hasn't been done properly. And again, these aren't nefarious people who are, I think they think they're doing a good job. They're doing what they've learned, they've been taught. But unfortunately, you're spending money that is not positively impacting your health. So I think that's really the biggest challenge, is understanding, like, how do we know if the person is kind of using your protocols or is looking at things to your standard. And it's very hard, if you open the yellow pages, not that they exist anymore, to differentiate
Yeah.
how someone is diagnosing and treating mold.
It really is amazing when you actually think about it, because in my industry, it's a 3-day class. In Texas, I think it's 5 days, so 3 or 5 days to learn how to remediate, right? But
Wow.
we're talking about the field of microbiology, and we're talking about construction, and those two meet together. But yet,
Yeah.
no one, including myself, is required to have a degree in microbiology, is required to read any materials or pass any tests on microbiology. And so really one of the first things that I did as I got into this career and I started seeing people getting sick, I'm looking at lab results. And the first thing that I do is I'm like, okay, well, how do I improve this? Right. So I researched every single species, researched what is a mycotoxin, what is an endotoxin. I'm looking at bacteria. I start figuring out how all of this comes together. And this is not something that was really taught in this class, right? This is something that I, of my own volition, decided to educate myself on, because I actually wanted to help these people that had all these things, and I wanted to understand, what do I have to do to make it better for them.
Yeah.
And I think one of the missing things in all of the standards and all of the protocols is, when you go back to microbiology, you have the living organism, and then you have what that living organism creates. So in this case, we're talking about mold and mold spores, right? So mold is a living organism, it creates mold spores. And then we have the toxins that it can create as well. But the mold spores are what's getting into people's bodies. The toxins are what's getting into the people's bodies as it kind of recirculates and enters the breathing zone. But yet we're just worried about the mold. I
Right.
mean, I even listened to a lecture by the EPA, and it was they invited some doctor from Harvard, some doctor from Stanford, and I'm listening in, and they're telling us about all these technologies available that I knew about that can measure mold in different places, and they're saying, we did some mold remediation in the basement, and then we tested on the second floor. And guess what? We found those same spores on the second floor, but we didn't find any leaks or sources on the second floor. It's like, yes, because things migrate, right, from one area to the next. We have HVAC, we have all this stuff that pushes air around the house. And he was like, well, but I don't know yet if it's necessary to bother to remove these spores on the second floor. Meaning they think that if you just remediate the basement where the mold was originating from,
Yeah.
you're going to be better, right? But no, because it contaminates the HVAC system. Now the HVAC system's the source. It settles in the dust. The dust lives with us until we remove it, right? And so what happens to most people is they remove mold, maybe, through these national companies or when they call their insurance company, but they leave all of the actual remnants behind. And those remnants, by the way, is what people are reacting to. It's always mind blowing to me because I've been doing this for so long at this point, but this is really the phenomenon of what occurs. And yet nobody's doing anything about it.
It's shocking. It always seems to me, I've noticed a pattern over time where, people are sort of addressing an issue from a new angle, and sometimes it takes the current systems a while to catch up. Like I remember, there's a million examples, but even like the mind-gut connection, that the alternative practitioners were talking about 20 years ago that Western medicine thought was insane. And now, of course, it's proven that there's this access between the gut and the brain, et cetera. And there's so many examples of this. And I feel like I'm just so grateful to you that you're pioneering in this field, because I'm living proof that the old way just is a real problem.
It is. And, I guess I'm okay with being labeled as insane for now, as long as we're helping people and we're creating this awareness, and that helps more people. Because I'd rather be insane than, sit here and let the same thing keep happening. It's
Exactly.
what's really interesting about this whole conversation, Gwyneth, is, many people have gone through and unfortunately will continue to go through similar challenges that you went through. And, hopefully this episode is helping answer this question. But, what do you think it will take to really make change regarding the true impacts that poor air quality can have on someone?
Well, it's actually really tough because it's such a silent debilitator and killer, and people are still not putting it together. I mean, I remember watching, I think, an episode of like Forensic Files or something like that recently, where it was actually an old episode, but it was about mold in a house and how this woman cognitively lost all her functioning. They could not figure out, she was so ill and they couldn't figure it out. And they finally figured out that the house was full of black mold. And I thought, gosh, this episode looks like it was filmed in the 80s. And it really hasn't become as prominently in the culture as I wish that it would have, because what you hear about most often these days are chronic illnesses, right? Things that people are struggling to overcome, autoimmune stuff, diseases of inflammation, and mold toxicity, environmental toxicity impacts that more brutally than anything. And to not know that there potentially is mold in your house that could be causing that and exacerbating a situation, adding to a situation, is really what I worry about for people. Like I feel like people need to understand that and it could not be mold, right? It could be something else. But
Sure.
if you're on a mission to figure out why you don't feel well, and in my case, the symptoms were like, I was really accumulating symptoms. I couldn't lose weight. My hormones were messed up. It was all because of the mold and the inflammation from the mold. So, I hope going forward that if people are on a journey of trying to figure out what's going on, that this is kind of more readily given as a potential source or cause of inflammation in the body.
I totally agree. It makes sense when you start to connect some of these dots, right? So we take 20,000 breaths per day. That's roughly 7.3 million breaths per year. over 50% of the global population deals with at least one chronic condition, right? If we look at
Yes.
if we look at, you know, we can go a lot longer without food, right? We can go probably a week or so without food, maybe longer. We can go a couple of days without water, right? Maybe longer. We can't go more than a couple of minutes without air, right? And
No.
it's so interesting to me because if you look at like the American Lung Association, anything smaller than 10 microns, meaning the size of the particle, has the worst capability of really impacting and harming the body because it's so small it bypasses our self-defense mechanism and enters
Right.
our bloodstream, right? And so what's smaller than 10 microns? Well, mold, bacteria, yeah, toxins, allergens, viruses, right? We also have another interesting statistic from Cleveland Clinic. The four major contributors to disease, there's four: parasites. Okay, so that's typically foodborne. Viruses, that's definitely environmentally related because it travels through the air. Then we have bacteria, which of course can be food, but also can be water damage inside the home. And then we have fungi, which includes mold, right? And so we know we've have all the answers out there, but like we're not connecting the dots like we should,
No,
right? And I think
that's right.
that's what it really comes down to. So hopefully today we've connected some dots for folks, and they can go and get their house checked. I mean, I know for sure for you from now on, you'll probably always get your house checked when you're changing houses and things of that nature, building houses, right?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I am now to the point where, I was like looking at an Airbnb to take the kids on spring break, and I'm like, do I need to send someone to check for mold in this house?
Yeah, right.
I
I
might
mean,
have, I might have become a little psycho about it.
hey, you know what? Like sometimes being just a little psycho about things to protect ourselves is not necessarily a bad thing. But it's true. Like, I mean, an Airbnb, right? You never know. It's a crapshoot. It could be a great place, could be a moldy place, could be, it is definitely something to think about. I mean, someone asked me that the other day, like, what about Airbnbs? I'm like,
Yeah.
do you like playing dice? Because that's where you're at. I mean, it's one of those things. But I think,
Yeah.
for so many people, especially husbands, I've noticed, like when I talk to a lot of husbands, there's always this realm of skepticism,
Yeah.
regarding that. And it's like, even when all the data is there, they're like questioning the data, right? And so
Yeah.
I found this like really interesting dynamic. And I think for so many people out there, it's like, if you know, right? If you know you're psycho like we are and check the way we check. But if you don't know, right, it's like you don't even think of it as a possibility. And I think I was actually at that point before I discovered this, probably maybe just like you, like almost blissfully ignorant of it. But I think now it's like, now that you see this and then you see how big this could be, right? I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to pretend that this is the root cause of all illness, but what if it is the root cause for many illnesses out there, or a lot of these autoimmune deficiencies and diseases that we have, and a lot of these other things? That could be a pretty, great discovery to have for civilization, don't
Yeah.
you think?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, so I'm again, like, it's just my hope that people continue to know about your work and what you do. And I'm so grateful to you again. I know I say this to you all the time, really, but you've really changed the way I feel in my body and given me like a peace of mind that I just didn't have before.
Well, thank you for believing in me and taking a shot and listening to everything that I said, and being such a great student, because it's a two-way street. I mean, if you don't follow the rules, right? Just like Dr. Will Cole has said to you in the past, if you don't follow the rules, it's hard to take
You're not going to
control. And
get the
yeah,
results. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Well, Gwyneth, this was an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your
Thank
time
you,
with me today. And
Michael.
I know everyone watching will absolutely love this. You may be dubbed the, air quality queen after this. I hope you'll embrace that.
I've been that would be good. That'd be an upgrade for me, I think.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. And, I will definitely be talking to you soon.
Okay, great. Thank you.